Hello, everyone. Welcome to Alchemized Women. Today is the first day, and we are with Eileen Tupaz. Eileen is a Philippine-based clinical psychologist, international mindfulness meditation teacher, mentor, retreat facilitator, well-being consultant, and practitioner, and former yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainer. Since 2011, she's been supporting people in lifelong labor of growing losses from proverbial nuts, and she loves providing this support in the form of teaching, mentoring, counseling, and coaching. She's passionate about helping people feel safe enough with themselves and in the world so that they can pursue their deepest intentions and embody their highest expression even in the face of trials and tribulations of life. Much of mindfulness teachings of Eileen is carried through the online mindfulness and meditation communities, Banyan and the Lotus Path, and I have privilege to work with Eileen in Banyan Together. Welcome, Eileen.
Eileen, thank you very much for accepting my invitation and being today here with us. And yeah, I deeply appreciate your presence, your teachings, your experience. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, so today I want to talk about a little bit about rest. So, because in our day-to-day chores, work, and sometimes our practices can be next thing to do rather than a resting place. And sometimes I think I can talk for myself. I can mix like my practice or spiritual practices with the next thing to do. It's like not a place of rest. And it's like, I need to do more. I need to practice more. I don't need to stop. And so I think, at least with my clients and the women I work with, I realize that some of us feel guilty the moment we stop. And yeah, I wonder your thoughts on this and where does this guilt came from? And yeah.
Thank you, Muge. I resonated so much with what you shared. For myself, when I began my spiritual practice, there was a there was much striving that went into it. It took me many years before it even occurred to me that the spiritual path could be a place of rest. I really did not relate to it as restful. And there's lots of reasons for this, whether you're on a spiritual path within a particular wisdom tradition or a more secular kind of spiritual path. And I know that sounds like a strange combination. But we even call this inner work, right? Which again points to how we associate the spiritual endeavor with work. So this whole notion of spirituality being a space for rest is also fairly new to me. And I'll talk about her a little bit more later. I think the teacher who's made the biggest impact on me is Tricia Hersey, the American activist. She wrote a book called Rest is Resistance. And there are many ideas in that book which were not new to me intellectually, but I think the way that she wove together the case made me realize how much conditioning I had absorbed around work. And to answer your question, part of that conditioning is that our worth is closely tied up with our productivity. How much can we generate? How much can we produce? And the conditioning is so deep that, to your point, when we have maybe half an hour where we're not doing anything, there's a sense of unease. there is a sense of guilt. There is a sense of, I'm wasting this precious 30-minute span of time. I shouldn't just be waiting in line. I should be listening to a podcast. Or if we're driving, I should be listening to an audiobook. The conditioning is so deep that we get agitated. We get anxious. There's a fundamental feeling of restlessness and shame when we're not maximizing every spare minute. And so this kind of social cultural conditioning makes it very difficult for us to rest. And it's not just the social values and the cultural conditioning. For many of us, and this includes myself, there's also the fact that we live in a world where job insecurity is real, where many people that I know have to work 2, 3 different kinds of careers just to make ends meet or just to be able to raise families and take care of aging parents. And so the financial pressures that are part of our world today also make it difficult to rest. And that also adds to the guilt because, if I have half a day instead of resting, I could be doing a freelance gig. I could be hustling. That's time wasted is time not earning something that could feed the family. And so financial precarity, job insecurity, and many developments like the rise of AI make the insecurity even more precarious. It kind of heightens the uncertainty, right? And I think the final cause and condition I'll name, and this list is not exhaustive. We've talked about the cultural, social conditioning around you're only worth something for as long as you're productive. So that's one. And then the economic pressures, the financial pressures, that's another layer. The third layer that I'll add is we just don't have the social safety nets we used to have. Like I remember when I was growing up, my parents had to make a living, but my grandparents were there.
Yes.
So there was extended family to fall back on. Many parents I know today, they're nuclear. They live far away from the grandparents. They live far away from relatives, and so the burdens of daily life fall on the shoulders of individuals. So I have to make a living with 2 to 3 different jobs, and then when I get home, I have to help my child with their homework, and go to the PTA conference, and it's just like, and then now with people who live in the sandwich generation, they also have to care for aging parents. So it's just so much for one person to handle within 24 hours. And so again, there's that, all of that takes time. And so the first thing to vanish is rest. People just don't get enough rest, don't get enough sleep. So I think these are some of the big factors. They're not necessarily the only ones that make rest such a luxury in our world today, and a luxury that people are very reluctant. Like there's a sense of, if I'm going to rest, I have to deserve this. Like I have
Yes.
to do enough so that I can justify to myself why I should be resting. And that's kind of absurd because if we look at every living creature sleeps. Like it's a biological necessity. And it's only with modern human beings that we have thoughts like, I should, do enough to deserve sleeping. And it's like, it's so strange to feel like you have to deserve a biological imperative, right? So anyway, I'll just pause there.
No, this is amazing. Oh, definitely the cultural aspect, the economy, social aspects of it. And the rest is the first one that we forgot. And yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying, because we need sleep. Even our organs, our body needs this to replenish itself.
And this is why I share this with you before today's conversation. I co-led a retreat last year where the theme was rest. And one of the more provocative statements I made during that retreat is this idea that to rest is one of the most urgent spiritual tasks of our times. And it seems a little strange to put it that way, but the case that I made is linked to what you just brought up, which is when we are deprived of rest, it's really a form of violence. It does something to the human body to be deprived of rest. You know, it's one of the biggest contributors to ill health. And so the injury that we do to ourselves physically when we don't have enough rest, that's a form of suffering, dukkha, you know, as we say in our shared path. And the injury doesn't stop there. Without enough rest, we're irritable. We're not, we're more, we're not as emotionally available. We're likelier to snap at others. We're likelier to lose our temper. And so that spills over to our relationships too. So it does something to our connections with others when we're frequently short-tempered. And on a cognitive level, we don't think very well. So we're more liable to make mistakes at work. We're not very creative. And so even just on a mental level, it also causes a fair amount of harm. And so it's not rocket science to say that it's injurious to be deprived of rest, and it is a source of injury on multiple fronts. Now, if we flip things over and look at it from the other perspective, when I reflect on the moments when I am most aware, when I am most compassionate, when I'm most joyful, when I'm at my best as a teacher, it's usually when I've rested well. You know what I mean? I'm much better able to be present to who I'm speaking with. I can hold space better. I am more present to the connections. I have space in my heart to hold the suffering of others. I have more patience. I have more forbearance. And so if we just think about it, many of the qualities that we admire in the spiritual path implicitly rest on a foundation of rest. No, pun not intended. But it's not like we're going to find a sutta that talks about get 8 hours of sleep, right? But whether we're talking about loving kindness or compassion or vicarious joy or equanimity, all of those states are much easier to access when we are sufficiently well rested.
Yeah.
And it's also easier to train as practitioners when we are sufficiently well rested. I mean, I've been in enough retreats where I don't get enough sleep, and half an hour into the sit, I'm really nodding off and struggling to focus or to concentrate. And so that's why I made that statement, which is it's a spiritual invitation to get enough rest. I guess the simplest way to put it is it's much easier to be aware and compassionate and wise when we are sufficiently resourced. And by that, I mean rest.
Even science now can prove this. Like all this polyvagal theory, and Stephen Porges is like, he's saying that I'm like proving what East has known for many years. Because when we don't rest, our nervous system is not flexible anymore. Yeah, we cannot go into, as you said, this joyful, happy, compassionate understanding ourselves and others. We don't have an access to that. And for this, if we don't rest, our body interrupts the flow. And when we are depleted, it's just, okay, Müge, you will rest. Let's try with the flu first.
Yeah.
This is how my body reacts always. For sure, everybody is different. My body first tries to intervene with the flu. Then, if not, a little bit of fever. Then, if not, in the
Yeah.
past I was having like bigger problems, but now I see, okay, stop.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's one of the challenges that we face because the conditioning against rest is so deep. We we only ever feel like we can afford it when we are sick. Okay?
yes,
And the invitation is to learn how to honor our need to rest without things going that bad. And I'm just as guilty as you. This is also a lifelong struggle for me. I remember when I first came down with COVID, this was during the pandemic. Even then, I didn't give myself permission to rest. I just took a lot of I took a lot of pills basically and powered through it because that was also a time of financial precarity. So, when I describe these causes and conditions that make it difficult for people to rest, I'm also talking about what I've experienced myself. So I have a deep compassion for what a struggle it can be to simply rest. Well, even if intellectually we know we should, um, it's still difficult. It's still work for me to give myself that permission.
this falling back and okay, realizing that I'm not resting, it's part of being aware of what's happening, and it's also a practice. And like, okay, I need to rest more. Like, I was reading Jack's book, it's Bringing Home the Dharma. And today I read a passage and he was mentioning there, like, it's part of life, it's part of practice. And this realization is like a lamp. It's just give a bit of light and we walk and we realize new stuff. And then with this light, we are starting to see new things as we walk with the, I'm imagining like something in old times, walking with a candle in the dark.
Mm.
As I walk through, it just lightens up a bit more, then I see more, then I'm getting closer and I see more. And maybe sometime in the future I will understand more, and yeah, what this rest means for me. But as I practice resting, I can see the effects on my body. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. And I'll expand on what you just shared because for many of us, it is difficult to rest. Noticing the gifts of rest is really important in this journey. So awareness, the practice of mindfulness is so central to this, not just in terms of noticing when we need rest. So that's one of the gifts of awareness too, like noticing that, oh, I'm getting really irritable. I'm getting really hot tempered. And that's a red flag for me that I'm getting rest deprived, right? So being aware of the signals that indicate we're not being well rested is definitely part of it. And it's one of the gifts of awareness. But the other gifts of awareness is for us to notice what the benefits of rest are, especially if we've been brainwashed into thinking that rest is optional and we can avoid it if if we drink enough caffeine, if we're disciplined enough, if we work hard enough. It can be a powerful antidote to that conditioning to really just notice what our experience of life is like when we are sufficiently rested, and we can engage with this like an experiment, like, oh, let's see what happens if, say, we sleep for 8 hours instead of our usual 6, like in the manner of an experiment. And then after 8 hours of sleep, with genuine curiosity, just noticing, like, what is my energy like? What is my mood like? How am I relating to other people? How am I able to perform at work? And so just being aware that, oh, this is what decent rest actually makes available, then it makes it a lot easier to deal with the conditioning, because we have experienced for ourselves, and seen it directly, that this is of benefit. This does reduce my suffering, and this does reduce the suffering of others. And so when we have enough awareness to really pay attention to the blessings of rest, it becomes easier to counter the conditioning. And the awareness is also helpful in the opposite situation. In situations where we don't get as much rest, to really pay attention to, oh, this is what happens to my mood. This is what happens to my energy. This is what happens to my ability to relate to others. So, in both the situations of having enough rest and not enough rest, mindfulness is really, really, really helpful, because we begin to see that this is the price that we pay when we're not being rested, right? And of course, again, to go back to how many of us may really be in circumstances or seasons of life where it is incredibly difficult to rest because of multiple responsibilities. That's where the other wing to freedom, this is from our shared teacher, Tara Brach,
Yes.
the other wing of freedom, which is compassion, which is to be gentle with ourselves and to just recognize, I want to rest, and it's just really hard, and to kind of hold ourselves with care during those times when we do want to, and it just doesn't seem to be available.
And it's really changes the relationship with our heart. And even if we don't have rest, our heart softens.
Yeah. And that softening is already an expression of rest.
Yeah. Eileen,
and maybe that's one other thing that
yeah, please.
No, I was just going to say this one thing, because I realized that I haven't expanded on this. When I talk about rest in this context, it doesn't just mean sleep or taking a nap. It can be anything that adds to our energy, that gives us a sense of being restored and rejuvenated. So it doesn't have to be sleeping. It doesn't have to be napping. It can be playing with a beloved pet. It can be taking a walk out in nature. It can be taking some time to drink your favorite tea. So, there are many, many different expressions of rest, and I'm not privileging one particular way of doing it.
And for people listening, let's give one small permission this week. And when you were talking, I thought, okay, maybe sleeping 2 hours more and seeing the effects can be. And like as a trial for the audience, what do you recommend?
Well, I imagine that for some people, adding 2 hours might be a big stretch. I usually just tell my clients, add in whatever increments seem doable to you. So if it's getting 5 more minutes, then start with 5 more minutes. If it's 15 more minutes, go with 15 more minutes. But to just very gradually expand the window, to whatever is available and accessible. Yeah.
Okay. So they will choose a practice. It can be sleep, it can be meditation, nature walk, playing with the pets, with the kiddo, and doing it mindfully, just an increment more.
Yes.
Eileen, would you guide us
start small. Start with micro moments of rest. Sure. All right. So I had to think about this because um, another way to talk about resting is it's really non-doing, and it's hard to guide a practice on non-doing. So I had to get a little bit creative. Okay, so I just invite you and whoever else is listening, and thank you to the dear listeners who chimed in, to just lower your gaze or to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. Just taking a long, deep breath in and a long, slow exhale out. Just making any adjustments you need to make to your posture so that the body feels relaxed and at ease. And I invite you to remember a time in your life where it was relatively easy for you to go to sleep. And maybe you were a child back in this time. And as you revisit this time, and it might be recent for some of you, it doesn't have to be so far back in the past, just bringing to mind one particular instance when you've gone to bed and you're just lying there underneath the covers, and there's nothing left for you to do for the day, nowhere you need to go, no one that you need to be. It is bedtime after all. And as you settle into that anticipation of sleep, just rest in that space you inhabit when you've gone to bed and you're done for the day. And maybe finally you have permission to just wait for sleep to claim you. And we'll just stay in that space for about 1 to 2 minutes. And this will be the practice. And before I end the meditation, just take a few moments to pause and notice what that was like for you. What was it like to simply rest, not feeling like you have to do anything or achieve anything, even in a practice? just noticing if it was challenging for you. And if it was, that's absolutely normal. Thank yourself for giving it a try anyway. And for those of you who found it restful and restorative, I invite you to do this every so often during your day, just a few moments. Doesn't have to be very long. Just giving yourself the grace of resting for a few precious moments. Yeah, thank you so much for your practice.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you. And thank you for
Thank you, Muge.
everyone for giving just few minutes to themselves and thank you, Eileen. Really.
Thank you.